What if the single most influential idea in human history, the concept of an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God, contained a fatal flaw? Not a minor mystery, not a gap in our understanding, but a logical error so severe, so fundamental, that it makes his existence impossible. This isn't about anger at religion. It's not about personal disappointment or a rebellion against tradition. This is about following a chain of reason, step by step, to its inescapable conclusion. It's about taking the very definition of God, as presented by its most sophisticated defenders, and holding it up to the cold, clear light of logic. By the end of this video, you will see how the definition of God collapses under its own weight, not from outside attack, but from internal contradiction. The proof begins now. Before we take a single step, we must be precise. We are not talking about a vague spiritual force or a deistic clockmaker who set the universe in motion and then stepped away. The target of this proof is the classical theistic God. The God of philosophers like Thomas Aquinas, Anselm of Canterbury, and Gottfried Leibniz. This is the God that billions are told to believe in, the foundation of mainstream theology. This God is defined by three absolute properties, often called the omni-triad. These are not optional features. They are essential to the definition. First, omnipotence. God is all-powerful. He can do anything that is logically possible. There is no force, no barrier, no rival that can limit him. Second, omniscience. God is all-knowing. He possesses complete knowledge of every fact, every possibility, every detail of the past, present, and future. Nothing is hidden from his awareness. And third, omnibenevolence. God is all good. He is not merely morally excellent. He is the very source and standard of goodness itself, perfectly loving, perfectly just, incapable of evil or deception. Remove any one of these properties, and the entire concept changes. You no longer have the God of classical theism. The entire structure of this philosophical argument and the target of our proof rests entirely on the coherence of these three properties existing simultaneously. If they cannot logically coexist, the God they define cannot exist. So, what does a logical proof actually mean? It means we start from agreed-upon premises. In this case, the very definition theists themselves provide. We then apply the rules of valid reasoning, the same rules that underpin mathematics and science. We follow the evidence wherever it leads, without resorting to emotion, without retreating into mystery. The structure of this proof is built on three separate lines of reasoning. Each one targets a critical weakness in the omni-triad. The first argument demonstrates an internal contradiction, a paradox of pure logic that unravels the very concept of unlimited power. The second argument presents an external contradiction, showing how the observable reality of our world, brimming with gratuitous suffering, directly conflicts with the definition. And the third argument exposes an experiential contradiction, revealing why the profound silence of God is itself undeniable evidence against a loving, all-powerful being. Individually, each of these arguments presents a devastating, some would say fatal, problem for the classical God. But together, they form an irrefutable chain of evidence, a chain that leads to one final, undeniable conclusion. Let's begin with the first, and perhaps most famous, logical trap, the paradox of power. Our first problem strikes at the very heart of God's defining attribute, His power. This isn't a debate about evidence or suffering. This is a problem of pure logic, a paradox that arises the moment you try to define what all-powerful actually means. The issue is deceptively simple. It's a question that has haunted theologians for centuries, and it goes like this. Can God create a stone so heavy that He Himself cannot lift it? Now, on the surface, this might sound like a childish riddle, a word game, but don't be fooled. This is a formal logical dilemma, and there are only two possible answers, yes or no. And both answers lead to the same catastrophic conclusion. Let's walk through them. First, let's say the answer is yes. If God can create a stone so heavy that He cannot lift it, then what happens the moment He creates it? By definition, there is now something He cannot do. He cannot lift that stone. Therefore, He is not all-powerful. A limit has been established. Okay, so let's try the other answer. Let's say the answer is no. If God cannot create such a stone, then there is also something He cannot do. In this case, He lacks the creative power to bring this specific object into existence. Once again, we have a limitation. He is not all-powerful. Do you see the trap? It's inescapable. Both possible answers lead to a contradiction of the very premise of omnipotence. The concept of a being that can do anything collapses when it meets a task that refers to its own limitations. It's like trying to answer the question, what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? The problem isn't with the force or the object. The problem is that the definitions are mutually exclusive. They cannot both exist in the same logical universe. The idea of an all-powerful being is, in essence, a lot like the idea of a square circle. The words can be said together. They are grammatically correct, but they describe nothing that can exist in reality. The properties are logically incoherent. Now, at this point, defenders of the faith often reach for an escape hatch. They say, but God is not bound by logic. He can do the logically impossible. Your little paradox doesn't apply to Him. This might feel like a solution. It has a certain mystical appeal. But in reality, it's not a solution at all. It's a surrender. It's an admission that the concept cannot be defended within the realm of reason. Think about what this claim actually does. If God can violate the laws of logic, then the entire framework we use to understand anything disintegrates. Logic is the foundation of meaning itself. We say God is good. But what does good mean if it doesn't logically exclude evil? If logic doesn't apply, then God could be both perfectly good and perfectly evil at the same time, which renders the word good meaningless. We say God is all-knowing, but knowledge is a logical concept. It implies truth, and truth is defined by logical consistency. If logic is optional, then God's knowledge could be both true and false simultaneously. The term knowing loses all substance. We say He is the first cause, but causality itself is a logical principle. If logic doesn't bind Him, then the concept of cause and effect falls apart, and the argument for Him as a first cause collapses into nonsense. By claiming God is beyond logic, the apologist doesn't save God. They annihilate the very possibility of defining Him. They are left with a meaningless, amorphous concept, a being that cannot be described, cannot be discussed, cannot be defended. A being that is beyond logic is a being beyond comprehension, beyond language, and beyond any meaningful existence we can conceive of. You might as well say, God is Glorbnark. It has the same intellectual value So, we are left where we started, firmly within the realm of reason. And within that realm, the conclusion is clear. The first property of the omnitriad, omnipotence, is not just mysterious or difficult to understand. It is self-contradictory. It is an incoherent concept. The foundation of the classical God is not just shaky. It is built on a logical error. And with that, the first pillar of our proof is firmly in place. The crack in the foundation is undeniable. If the first problem was an abstract paradox of pure logic, the second is brutally concrete. It's written in the screams of the innocent and the silence that follows. This is the problem of evil and suffering in our world. And it presents a contradiction, not within the definition of God itself, but between that definition and the observable reality we all inhabit. This argument is so powerful because it's not a riddle. It's a simple, logical trilemma. Let's lay it out, premise by premise. Premise 1. If God is omnipotent, he can prevent all evil, instantly, completely. There's no suffering, no natural disaster, no act of cruelty that is beyond his power to stop. Premise 2. If God is omniscient, he knows about all evil, every single instance. He knows about the earthquake before the first tremor, the cancer cell before the first symptom, the murderer's intention before it is formed. Nothing is hidden from his awareness. Premise 3. If God is omnibenevolent, he wants to prevent all evil. Out of his perfect goodness, love, and justice, he would have both the desire and the will to eliminate suffering. Now, we come to the observation, the data point that cannot be ignored, the fact that stares us in the face every single day. Evil exists, not as a minor footnote, not as a rare exception, but as a pervasive, overwhelming feature of existence. From the genocides that stain human history to the child dying of bone cancer, suffering is real, it is widespread, and it is often utterly gratuitous. From these 4 points, the conclusion is inescapable. A God who is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good cannot exist. The world we see is fundamentally incompatible with the world such a God would create. A simple, powerful graphic appears on screen, listing the 3 premises, the observation, and the bold conclusion. But to understand the full force of this argument, we need to look closer at the nature of this evil. We can break it into 2 categories. First, there is moral evil, the suffering caused by human choices, the cruelty, the violence, the betrayal. Theologians often try to explain this away with the free will defense. They argue that free will is such a great good that God is justified in allowing the evil that results from it. He doesn't cause the murder. He just allows the free will that makes it possible. But this defense has a fatal flaw. It might, and I stress might, account for some moral evil. But it fails completely for the second category, natural evil. This is suffering that comes not from human choice, but from the very fabric of nature itself. The earthquake that buries a school, the tsunami that wipes out a village, the virus that ravages a body. No human free will creates a tornado. No one chooses to be born with a debilitating genetic disease. This suffering is baked into the system, and this leads us to the most devastating category of all, gratuitous suffering. Suffering that serves no discernible purpose, teaches no lesson, builds no character. What higher good is served when a child is tortured to death? What soul-making purpose is achieved when a tsunami indiscriminately kills tens of thousands? The scale, the randomness, The sheer excess of agony is far greater than anything needed to facilitate free will or moral growth. It is simply pointless. This is where the second major defense, the soul-making theodicy, collapses. The idea that suffering builds character might apply to minor hardships, but it becomes monstrous when applied to the worst atrocities. Does a baby born with a painful, terminal illness need character development? The argument is not just weak. It is morally obscene in the face of such suffering. Finally, when pressed into a corner, the last resort is the mysterious ways defense. The claim that God has a plan we cannot possibly understand. But this is not an argument. It is an admission of defeat. It is an appeal to ignore the clear evidence of our eyes and the logic of our minds in favor of blind faith. It asks us to believe that a God defined as perfectly good is responsible for horrors that we would condemn as evil in any human context. If we saw a human parent allow their child to suffer in such ways for a mysterious plan, we would call it criminal neglect. Why does God get a free pass? The numbers don't lie. Statistically, the distribution of suffering is chaotic, unfair, massively excessive. It is not the balanced, purposeful system we would expect from a benevolent architect. It is the world we would expect if natural forces, blind evolution, and chance were the only governing principles. The problem of evil is not a philosophical puzzle to be solved over tea. It is a direct confrontation between a definition and the data. The definition of the classical God predicts a world with little to no gratuitous suffering. The data shows a world drowning in it. Therefore, the definition fails. The second pillar of our proof is established. The world we observe is not the world an all-powerful, all-good God would make. The evidence of reality itself contradicts the existence of the being it is supposed to prove. The first pillar showed a crack in the logic of God's power. The second showed a chasm between his supposed goodness and the world's suffering. Now, we come to the final pillar, the one that strikes at the most personal level. This argument deals not with the world's noise, but with God's silence. It's called the problem of divine hiddenness. If the God of classical theism is real, a being who is not just powerful and good, but also loving and desiring of a relationship with his creation, then his existence should be the most obvious, undeniable fact of existence, not a matter of debate, but a universal, experiential truth. We can frame this as another logical proof, one rooted in the nature of love and relationship. Premise 1. An omniscient God would know exactly how to reveal himself convincingly to every single human being. He would understand the unique psychology, culture, and personal history of every individual. He would know the precise words, the exact sign, the perfect moment that would foster genuine belief without violating free will. There would be no room for ambiguity or misunderstanding. Premise 2. An omnibenevolent God, defined as perfectly loving, would want to provide this revelation. If he truly desires a relationship with each person, then leaving them in a state of doubt or non-belief would be an act of neglect. A loving parent seeks a connection with their child. A truly loving God would seek a connection with his creation. Premise 3. An omnipotent God could accomplish this. There are no barriers, no limitations. He could make his presence in nature as clear as the sun in the sky, for everyone, simultaneously. Now, we look at the observation, the empirical fact. Widespread, sincere non-belief exists. This isn't about stubborn atheists or people in rebellion. This is about countless individuals across history and in the present day who have genuinely, earnestly sought God. They have prayed. They have studied. They have pleaded for a sign, a feeling, for any glimpse of the divine. And what have they found? Overwhelmingly, they report silence and absence. Furthermore, entire civilizations have developed with no concept of the classical theistic God. If such a God existed, this should be statistically impossible. The conclusion is, once again, inescapable. A God who has the knowledge, the desire, and the ability to make himself known to all sincere seekers would do so. The fact that he apparently does not is powerful evidence that he is not there. But to truly feel the weight of this argument, we need to move from logic to human experience. Think of the analogy of a parent and a lost child. Imagine a child separated from their parent in a vast, dark forest. The child is terrified, crying out, "Mom, Dad, where are you?" Now, imagine the parent is nearby. They have a powerful flashlight. They can see the child perfectly. They can hear the desperate cries, and they love the child more than anything. What would we expect the parent to do? They would immediately call out, shine the light, run to their child, provide comfort. To do anything else, to hide behind a tree and remain silent, to watch the child's terror mount, would be an act of unspeakable cruelty. We would not call that parent loving. We would call them a monster. Yet this is precisely the situation described by divine hiddenness. We are the lost children in the cosmos, crying out into the silence. And if the theistic God is real, he is the hidden parent, choosing to remain silent. This is not a test of faith. It is a form of emotional abandonment. Abandonment we would condemn in any human relationship. Why is it considered a virtue in a deity? This silence is incompatible with a loving nature. A love that hides itself when it has the power to be revealed is not love at all. It is a game, a cruel experiment. Some might say this hiddenness is necessary to preserve our free will, or to allow for genuine faith. But this makes no sense. If I know my wife exists because she is standing right in front of me, talking to me, it doesn't destroy my free will to love her. In fact, it makes a genuine relationship possible. Faith, in the sense of believing without evidence, is not a virtue when the being in question has the means and the motive to provide that evidence. It becomes a requirement to believe in the face of his apparent absence. The silence of the universe is not a puzzle to be solved by theologians. It is evidence to be weighed. And the weight of this evidence is heavy indeed. The hiddenness of God is the final experiential contradiction. Logic says his definition is incoherent. The world says his goodness is absent, and our own hearts, crying out into the void, say his love is missing. The silence is not a test. It is the answer. A truly loving, all-powerful, all-knowing God would be unmistakably, undeniably present. His absence is our evidence. With this, the third pillar is complete. The structure of theism now stands on three fatal contradictions. The proof is overwhelming. Now, we have followed three separate paths. We began with a paradox of pure logic, deep within the definition of God himself. We then turned to the external world and found its rampant suffering to be a direct contradiction of that definition. Finally, we looked inward to the profound human experience of divine silence and found it to be the ultimate evidence of absence. Individually, each of these arguments is a formidable challenge. The Kant's paradox of power shows the concept of omnipotence as logically incoherent, a square circle. The problem of evil shows that the world we observe is empirically incompatible with an all-powerful, all-good ruler. And the Fourier problem of divine hiddenness shows that the lived experience of humanity is one of abandonment, not communion. But their true power is not in their isolation. It is in their bridge, convergence. Think of each argument as a strong thread. A single thread can be snapped, but when you weave them together, when you twist the threads of logic, evidence, and experience into a single cord, you create something unbreakable. The logical paradox proves the definition is nonsense. The evidence of evil proves the definition doesn't match reality. The experience of hiddenness proves the definition doesn't match our lives. There is no angle left from which the classical God can be defended. Therefore, the conclusion is not just likely, it is inescapable. The being defined by the simultaneous possession of omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence cannot exist. The God of classical theism is impossible. Now, I can already hear the final objections rising. Let's address them head on. The first is the retreat to faith. You just need to believe. But faith is not a tool for resolving contradictions. Faith is what you exercise in the absence of certainty, not in the face of direct disproof. You can have faith that a loved one will recover from an illness, but you cannot have faith that a married bachelor is single. Faith cannot make 2 + 2 = 5. To invoke faith here is to admit that reason has failed. The second, more sophisticated objection is this: God is beyond human understanding. His ways are higher than our ways. This sounds humble, but it is ultimately a surrender of meaning itself. If God is truly beyond our understanding, then we cannot meaningfully apply any words to him. We cannot call him good because our concept of goodness is human. We cannot call him loving because our understanding of love is limited. The moment you claim God is beyond logic, you rob the words all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good of any meaning we can comprehend. You are no longer talking about a being with definable properties. You are talking about an empty abstraction. These objections do not solve the problems we've laid out. They do not mend the logical paradox. They do not explain the existence of gratuitous suffering. They do not justify the divine silence. They are simply a retreat from the battlefield of reason into the safe fog of mystery. But a retreat into mystery is a retreat from reason itself. And once you abandon reason, you abandon any possibility of a coherent discussion. The conversation is over. The proof stands. The threads are woven. The rope holds. The God of philosophy, defined by the omni-triad, is an impossible being. This conclusion, that the God of classical theism is impossible, is not a message of despair. It is one of profound liberation. For centuries, this idea has told us we are actors in a predetermined divine play. Our scripts written by an inscrutable author. But if that author never existed, then a stunning truth emerges. We are not merely actors. We are the authors. Meaning is not a secret to be discovered, hidden in ancient texts or divine whispers. It is something we create. We build it through our actions, through the love we give and receive, through our pursuit of knowledge, and through our struggle against suffering. The universe is not pointing us toward a predetermined purpose. It is presenting us with an open canvas. This is the ultimate empowerment. The responsibility for our story, for our morality, for our future, rests squarely on our shoulders. And that is exactly where it should be. This freedom comes with a profound responsibility. The responsibility to be good to one another, not out of fear of punishment or hope of reward, but simply because it is right. Because empathy and compassion are the foundations of a world worth living in. The responsibility to confront suffering, not with passive acceptance, calling it a mysterious plan, but with the active tools of science, medicine, and solidarity. We are the ones who must fix the problems before us. I want to hear from you now. When did you first question these ideas? Share your experiences in the comments below. Let's have that conversation. If this journey of reason resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. This is only the beginning. Next time, we'll deconstruct another sacred cow, the compelling evidence that free will is an illusion. The universe has been silent because it contains no divine voice. But that silence is not an emptiness. It is a space for our voices, our ideas, our humanity to finally fill the void. The universe is silent because it is waiting for us to speak. Let's make it count.